Hello, everybody. Welcome, welcome. Glad to have everybody here. How is everybody doing today? Oh, we got a lot of people in the chat. Susie, Kat, Gwenna, hey, Terry, Steph, and SD. Good to have everybody on. So, welcome to AutoCrit's Reverse Outlining Your Story session of the AuthorTube Writing Conference. I think I've got a little bit of um, okay, that should be better. I shouldn't be echoing into the multiverse now. All right, so again, welcome to AutoCrit's Reverse Outlining Your Story presentation for the AWC. My name is Katherine, and I'm a member of the AutoCrit editing team. And I am a full-fledged pantser, so I have reverse outlined a lot of stories, and I'm here to spill the tea on all the tips and tools you need. Now, if you're not a pantser, don't run away, because you can use a lot of these same steps during your outlining phase while you're making sure your outline is tight, or if something isn't quite working the way you wanted while you're drafting, and we'll touch a little bit on that in a little bit. But for those who are new and just tuning in for the first time, this presentation is part of the AuthorTube Writing Conference that's going on this week. So thank you to Shannon and everybody who's coordinating with this. There is a link in the description box to the feedback form, which will not only help us, but also help Shannon and their team and give you bonus points to be entered into giveaways, of which AutoCrit memberships are a prize. So please go down after this live or during this live and bookmark that and check out the other playlist for what's going on this week. With that, and we have Kevin in the background helping out with chats as well. So if you have questions, feel free to drop them. If we don't get to them during the live, we will have a small session at the end to answer them. All right, with that, let's dive right in. Got a lot to cover and only an hour to cover it. So what is a reverse outline? A reverse outline is going through the process of defining your story's key beats. It's a way to strip your story down to the bones and make sure that the bones of your story are solid. So unlike an outline that you do before you write a book, you have gotten inspired. You wrote your whole book out. You had a dream. You woke up in the middle of the night. You've been feverishly writing for 3 hours, and then you go, oh, what am I even doing anymore? And you want to come back and make sure that there's structure, that the story makes sense, that it doesn't read like a dream that you had in the middle of the night when you were sick with COVID, right? You want this to actually make sense and be something that readers can follow along with. And that comes down to bones. It comes down to the plot, the pacing, the world building, the character development. You saw that character very vividly while you were writing their story, but does the way you see that character come across to your readers, right? And we need a guide of sorts to make that happen. So as a pantser, a lot of people ask me all the time, oh, how do you know what you're writing? How do you keep up with it? And the large truth is, a lot of times I get stopped and I go, oh, what was I writing? And this way of going back and reverse outlining can help me keep track of what I've already done, so that as the story unfolds, I don't lose sight of where I've been and end up with big plot holes to fix down the line or anything like that, right? Now, this is not to be confused with developmental editing. We do have an entire section for developmental editing in AutoCrit, and also for your editing process. Even if you don't use AutoCrit for your editing, you should probably spend some time working on developing your plot further. Reverse outlining sets the bones, and developmental editing helps you flesh out those bones. So developmental editing is going to make sure that you avoid confusion in your piece. Once you've identified what your bones are, you identify how you can make that plot better, how you can make your pacing better, how you can improve the world building, how you can make sure that everything's immersive and clear. But you don't have a foundation with which to judge this if you don't have a basic understanding of your story. And that's why we're here today. And thank you all, yes, for the like button smashing. We appreciate it. So when do you start reverse outlining? We talked a little bit about you can wait till you have a completed rough draft. You got up in the middle of the night, you couldn't quit thinking about the story, you knocked the whole thing out, and now you're sitting there with 50,000 words over the course of however much time it took you In my case, it's usually NaNoWriMo, and I just write feverishly, right? And then you're stuck with a book. And what do you do with this draft? You start by going back and making sure that it all makes sense. But you don't have to wait until you have a rough draft. You can also do a reverse outline when you've lost your way, or when you've lost your inspiration and you feel like you're in a slump, you don't know what to do with your story, or you've hit a wall. So, for example, if you don't know how you got where you are in your story and you look up and you go, wait, I wanted them to end up here. Why is this character looking at that character all lovey-eyed? He's promised to somebody else. Then you may have to go back and start reverse outlining and see where those relationship threads started crossing in ways you didn't want, right? Your story could be going the wrong way entirely. So you could say, I want to write a dark / grimdark fantasy. There will not be romance in this book. And then before you know it, you've got a side character who's morally gray and happens to be very good looking. And your main female protagonist never wanted a relationship and is all of a sudden leaning that way. Does that mean that your story has to stay the way you originally intended it? No. But if that's not the way you want the story to go, then you need to be able to rein that back in. And reverse outlining can help you determine where to do that, where you veered off. Or if your story's going as planned and your inspiration's gone and you just hit the slump, you don't feel the joy writing it anymore, you want to give up, you want to let it be, this could be a tactic to try so that you are inspired to go back to what made you love the story. What made you start writing the story? What was it about the plot or the characters that really drew you in? And then determine where that interest left. Is there a boring spot in the story that could also potentially be boring to readers? And if you knock that out, you'll not only get your inspiration back, but your readers will stay more invested in the story. So these are all things that we are trying to fix when we do a reverse outline. So how do we do it? It sounds great in theory, but as a pantser, the word outline makes me break out in a cold sweat. So don't overthink it. We're going to go through the steps on exactly how to tackle this. And if you've ever been in AutoCrit, there are some tools that will walk you through this. We'll talk a little bit at the end about a demo we're going to come back and do tonight to show you guys our system in depth. But whether or not you have a tool to help you, there are some pretty clear, not as daunting as it sounds, steps that you can follow to make this process easier. So first, you are going to want to fill out a beat sheet. Don't run away. I know as a pantser, that's where I lose a lot of people, including myself. It's like being back in English class in college and the professor goes, fill out this skeleton. It's not like that. It doesn't have to be that way. But you do want to fill out a beat sheet for a few reasons. So first, your stories are typically going to be either character-centered or plot-centered. And depending on which one you have accidentally written or purposefully written, if you're watching this as a planner, you're going to want to track a different series of steps for your book. And there's a whole bunch of different guides you can use for plots. AutoCrit has some built into our system, but there's also the hero's journey, the heroine's journey, the 7 steps, the 3-act structure. In the end, they gear toward more one or the other, right? A plot-centered beat sheet, which is basically a beat being what happens at what point in your story. Thanks so much for pointing that out. And beat sheet makes you break out in hives. Yeah. So a character-centered story is going to be a story where the character's growth and change is the most important thing about the whole story. Everything else that happens is just to propel that forward. And a good example is in the Hunger Games, right? Katniss Everdeen in the Hunger Games books, not the movies, which are third-person, plot-centered. In the books, they are first-person point of view, and they're character-centered. And the story doesn't tell you what's going on with Snow in the Capitol and these other things outside. You only ever see Katniss, and you only see what she sees in that exact scene, because it's not as much about the plot as what the events around her are doing to her as a person, how she's changing as a person as a result of what she's going through, what motivates her to make the decisions that she does. And therefore, that experience tints our perception of everything going on in the plot. Then plot-centered story, on the other hand, is going to be the movie equivalent in which Katniss was a character propelling the story, but there was a whole big world and all these other characters involved in moving that story along. And in a book format, that would be like Lord of the Rings, where we've got all these characters that are all propelling the main character, Frodo, to put the ring in Mount Doom and destroy it. But ultimately, while Frodo does have some growth, his growth isn't the reason we're reading Lord of the Rings. We're reading Lord of the Rings to see what all is going to fall apart around him as they deliver the ring to Mount Doom. So you're going to fill out a beat sheet and try some different ones. Pull out the hero's journey and say, oh, I'm writing a big questing fantasy. I want it to be sort of plot centered. Let's start plugging in the hero's journey versus a more character centered, like the heroine's journey focuses a little more on characters, a little less on plot, and see which one feels like it matches the flow of your story. And this will also help you down the line when you're marketing to readers to know where your readers are, what they're going to expect based on how you market it with your tropes and things. If you have a romance story or a horror story or a mystery story, there are some special considerations to take into account when you're doing your beat sheet, right? So in a romance, we don't just have a plot and the happily ever after. We have certain things readers expect at certain points. They expect a meet cute early on, which is where the couple meets for the first time. And even if they don't admit it right then, we know they're going to get together in the end, okay? They have a meet cute. They have a you're not for me and I'm going to walk away. And then one of them maybe does walk away and then they get back together. And in the end, we do have that happily ever after that maybe my dark fantasy books don't have. So it doesn't matter if my characters get a happily ever after. And then horror, we've got gradual setup with the suspense, with the thrilling elements, gearing up the tension toward what's frightening, what's disgusting, what's going to be full of gore and deliciously dark, as I like to say. There's some different elements that you want to consider there, especially with world building. And then mystery, you're going to start dropping subtle clues. You're going to set up misdirecting points. They're going to go off on little tangents and find out that wasn't the right thing. So a sheet can help you sort of condense those points down and make sure that you have them where you want them. Short stories still need to have a fully fledged beginning, middle, end, even if you just use a basic 3-plot structure. If there's not a clearly defined beginning, a clearly defined middle, where they're struggling through something, and a clearly defined end, you may have more of an excerpt for what could be a bigger piece. I see that a lot when people send a short story and it actually reads like a first chapter or a prologue and they set something up. And then in nonfiction, there are even beat sheets for you. So if you write nonfiction, there are persuasive ones, narrative ones, and informative ones. These are going to be things like where you establish your authority, where you introduce the ideas for the characters or for the readers on what they're going to be learning. Beat sheets are guides. They are not end all be alls. So if you get going on a beat sheet and it is not working for you, you can walk away. It is okay. You can change it. You can dabble around. You don't even always have to have the beats in the exact same order, depending on what sheet you're using, your genre you're using. That can change. You just sort of want to make sure you've got those key points in there somewhere. With the exception of romance, you've got to have a happily ever after ending. I'm sorry, guys. Okay, so let's talk about what some of those standard fiction beats are. So the life before beat. This is going to be, and there's a whole lot of other beats. Again, you can flesh this out. Basic, bare bones standard beats. You're going to have the life before in your story. In a hole in the ground there lived a hobbit. Not a nasty, dirty, wet hole filled with the ends of worms and an oozy smell, nor yet a dry, bare, sandy hole with nothing in it to sit down on or to eat. It was a hobbit hole, and that means comfort. What are we learning about the character and their world and what's at stake? What are they giving up to go on this journey? This is what we are looking for in that opening of a story. Who is the character before their journey changes them? Frodo Baggins is a young, naive, carefree hobbit versus, in The Hobbit, the book, Bilbo is stubborn, stuck in his ways, but he has a hint at wanting adventure. What did they give up? What are they leaving behind? Katniss is leaving behind Prim in order to save her life, and knowing she could be leaving her sister to starve to death and die because her mother's not going to take care of her, right? In Hunger Games. Luke is leaving behind the only world he ever knew. What are they giving up in order to go on the journey? And then what are the stakes? What happens if they lose? A lot of times characters are propelled by wanting to maintain or help or protect something at home. So are those stakes in your setup? Is that part of their life before? Is there a Rosie waiting for Sam to come home to marry her, right? Is there a galaxy waiting to be saved? Is Merlin going to find Nemo and get his son back? Going back to our beats overall, we've got an inciting incident next. This is going to be that moment where you leave your world behind. You're my only hope, Obi-Wan Kenobi. I've got to leave and go and save the world. This is why the character leaves. It motivates them to move on. Then there's usually a conflict of some kind. This is usually going to be the first time they encounter the antagonist in some way or something related to the antagonist. If you're writing a piece that doesn't have a protagonist, antagonist clearly defined, and it's more internal, this can be their first internal conflict within themselves. Do I really want to do this? Do I really want to go here? We recently did a short story challenge for June that was, or for May, that was themed about racing. And as we were reading through the stories, there were several good stories that were focused on characters growing through a fear of overcoming their obstacle in order to complete the race, right? Which is very internalized. But that obstacle is very real and it's very relatable for readers at the same time. Then you should have your midway. Your midway is going to be the point where they are facing down that big issue for the first time. They're overcoming something. They think they're going to beat this just in time to drop into conflict number 2. So if we take the Star Wars example, conflict number 1, they get kidnapped, captured by the first Star Destroyer, right? And then they're like, oh no, I don't want to be on here. The Death Star, they don't want to be on the Death Star. They have to escape the Death Star. They get there and they're like, we're going to beat the Empire. That's the midway. They go after in the midway, going after setting up their plan to destroy the Empire. They've escaped. Things are great temporarily, only to turn around and fall into the Death Star is going to destroy the whole planet. I got to go kill it. And then the climax. This is going to be your showdown with your villain. This is going to be the moment the main character has to do the final push to overcome whatever wall they are on. And then at the end, we want a resolution. The resolution is going to be where you wrap up everything for the readers. You're going to make us know why we stuck in there the whole time. This is going to be that happily ever after for romance. This is going to be that satisfying explanation of the crime and the case that was solved in the mystery. This is going to be the moment where you tie together everything you wrote in your biography or your memoir and present it to us in a way that makes us go, aha. Let's see. We got a question about character-centered beat sheet is really elaborate, though. What do you do when you have beats you don't know how to fill in? That is a great question because we are about to get into characters, and I think characters is a big part of why it's elaborate. So if you're on AutoCrit, there's a little ideas button you can click on blank beats and holes. But if you don't have AutoCrit and you're trying to come back to those and plug it in yourself, you want to make sure that you're noting where your holes are so that you can come back and address them once you have fleshed out your characters. So the plot is one side, and then we're getting into step 2, which is fleshing out the characters. Once you know both, you should then have enough information to go back and plug in these holes that have popped up. Like, oh, I didn't give them a happily ever after. Well, why not? Well, that's deeper than just you didn't write a happily ever after. That means that something happened with the characters that didn't naturally lead them to end up wanting a happily ever after, right? So what needs to change on the character level to shift them there naturally? And we're going to flesh out characters next. Fleshing out characters, there's a lot of different types. We have protagonists, antagonists, relationship characters, distraction characters. This whole list is up on AutoCrit, by the way. If you have the story analyzer open and you go to the characters tab, you can click the little I button there and it'll walk you through what all these different characters are. We're going to go through them in a little detail here. I'm going to pause and catch up with any questions about step 1, which is the plot-centered main story points. Thank you, Angela. I like that, Janice. I know sometimes the midpoint is after a bunch of failure and things looking up until the disaster, which is right because it's following that first conflict, right? That's our first big set of failures. Oh no, we went to save Princess Leia on Alderaan, except Alderaan's exploded. And then we got caught in a tractor beam. And then we got stuck hiding in the floorboards of our own ship to not get captured during the tractor beam. Failure, 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 midpoint. Let's get off this ship. And here's everything that has to go into getting us out of here, right? And then, like you said, you get out just in time to go back to 2. Now, some of the more in-depth plot points have things like a dark period of the soul after the midpoint, where you get out of it, but you really have to process the damage that happened during conflict number 1. And you didn't have time to do that because you were in the midway. And you got to come back down. You've got to decide, what are you going to do now that you've lost this person that's close to you? What are you going to do now that the whole reason you were doing this journey is gone? So you can add on for sure. The points I mentioned were just more simplified guidelines there. And B, yay, yes, that was your question. Thank you for pulling that up. And once we finish the slides, if you're still on B, I'll pull up the system just to show this point too, if we've got a little extra time. Lots of love for The Hobbit. Right now, I'm just using my own plotting device. It's a Frankenstein of others on a whiteboard with index cards. See, I have in my head the picture of like the lines with different colored strings and stickies. It can definitely be a lot there. The muse runs off with the plot willy-nilly into the plot bunny meadow. Now, you don't have to stop your writing process in order to do this, right? The reverse outlining process is made for pantsers like us. You can write your whole book to the very end and then come back. But if you get stuck, you can definitely go back and start it early. So don't feel like you have to wait till the end, but don't feel like you need to skip over errors and come back and fix them and potentially make more holes either. Use it when it's most helpful for you. How do you decide which characters are important enough to add to this beat sheet? Great question. I think that gets us back on track. So let's dive in here. Every story has a set of characters that readers don't realize they're looking for. They're looking for a main character or a protagonist from the second they pick up the book, for example. When they open that page, it is usually the very first named character, and that named character is the one we are immediately trying to connect with, even though we don't realize we're doing it. We're looking for someone who is going to move this story along. The story is about them. Even in books with multiple POVs, which I write, almost all of my books have like 2+ POVs. One character is pivotal. Without this character, nothing in the story will happen. Frodo and Sam and Legolas and Aragorn and Merry and Pippin and Gandalf are all main characters. That's true. But without Frodo bringing the ring to Mordor, none of the other stories matter, because everything else hinges on Frodo putting that ring inside of Mount Doom. And Sam is his supporting character. He's not wanting to carry the ring for Frodo. He'd rather carry Frodo, remember? So there's going to be one primary protagonist. Without them, everything else falls in place. You could replace the other person. You could replace Sam with Merry, Sam with Pippin, if you had to, and see some other interactions, and things wouldn't hit the same way, but that ring still has to get to Mount Doom. Somehow, that's the point of this book. So which of your characters makes it clear, makes it concrete that this is their story? Your antagonist is going to be the person who is getting in the protagonist's way. They want to keep the main character from getting what they want. Sometimes this is malicious and sometimes it's not. Some of the best antagonists are people who genuinely mean well. Going back to Lord of the Rings, these aren't all going to be Boromirs, right? We're not going to have everybody wanting to steal the ring from Frodo. Instead, we're going to have characters with families who are contracted to do this job or else. We've got characters whose lives are on the line, who have their own things they're trying to protect. Because don't forget that just because these other characters are side characters, they are people. They have their own lives. They're not there solely to serve the main character's journey. So it's natural that if this was a group of real people, that they would have conflicting values, conflicting needs from time to time, right? You're going to have a relationship character. This is where, if you do multi-POV, your secondary main character usually falls. This can also be where your mentor type character falls. This is going to be the person who propels the main character past their obstacle. It's the Sam that carries Frodo up the side of Mount Doom. It's the love interest who gets the main character in your romance to finally forgive her exes and love again, to find value in herself again. It's the person who tells the detective not to quit, don't give up. It's Dory to Merlin in Finding Nemo. This is the person that pushes them past those obstacles. Then you have your distraction character, and this is going to be the person that maybe you think's the antagonist, but really they're just distracting them. They often have a different outlook from the character, and that changes their opinion of what should be done, and therefore they're at odds with the character. Going back to Boromir, he thought the ring should go to Gondor. It should be a weapon. It should be used. Does that mean he's evil? No. He has a very different opinion, though, and he is in that antagonizing role, but he's not Sauron. He's not the antagonist. He's a distraction character. And the last four we have here that we see most common are going to be emotion characters. These are going to be characters who have emotional reactions to the main conflict. Looking at Lord of the Rings, that's going to be Merry and Pippin. They're very emotional. They get caught up in the moment. They're throwing stones in the middle of the battle. And they're wonderful. And sometimes these are going to be your comic relief characters. Sometimes these are going to be the characters who are over dramatic. Jar Jar Binks in Phantom Menace, Donkey in Shrek. These are going to be your people who bring human emotions and feelings in the scene beyond the character's strong facade, right? If I was facing a dragon over a brimstone moat, how would I be feeling? A lot more like Donkey than Shrek. Okay, so Donkey brings us into that scene. The reason character is the character who wants to act logically. They're the people who analyze everything and address things with a logical plan of attack. Your support character are going to be other side characters who are supportive and loyal to the protagonist. And then your opposition characters. The opposition characters are a little more malicious often than a distraction character. So in case Boromir didn't mean any harm to Frodo. Boromir just wanted the ring to go to Gondor for his own reasons and, in his mind, justified reasons. But he didn't try to manipulate Frodo, right? When you shift over to Wormtongue, though, and what Wormtongue does with King Theoden over in Rohan, that's an opposition character. That's someone who's twisting and manipulating and planting seeds of doubt in the character. And the worst thing about it is sometimes these can be the character's best friends, parents, lovers. Don't go on that journey. Don't do that. You know you can never do that. You know you'll never amount to anything. These are going to be characters who add an obstacle to the character's life pretty much just by being there, and they have to be overcome in order to move on with the journey. Now pause here a second. Merry and Pippin are important because they teach us about the Hobbit meal schedule. Glad to see so many Lord of the Rings lovers on here. It's a good example, even if you're not necessarily a huge Lord of the Rings fan, just because of all the different cast types, right, in that giant cast of characters. So I think I saw a question about series. Here we go. What if you have a series and you need to plot the series plots as well as the plots for each book. For instance, romance doesn't always have a happily ever after. No, but it should have a happy for now if it's a series, right? There are some differences in series plots. For the sake of reverse outlining, you already have a book written. So I would suggest, or a big portion of a book written, I would suggest starting there. Start by taking the one you have, plot it out, and then that will establish in your developmental editing phase, which comes after reverse outlining, your unresolved plot threads and things like that. And you can determine which of those plot threads should have been resolved in this story. For example, which ones are holes and which ones are there for a series. Jot those down or save them to your notes, or if you're an AutoCrit, save as a new file and start your own note board for book 2 and book 3. And you can do that to flesh out your series, right? Because if you're a pantser, that unfortunately doesn't usually change for book 2. And I say unfortunately because that's why it is so hard to write book 2. You write book 1 and then you fly through it. It's super easy. And then book 2 comes and you're like, what was I thinking? I don't have inspiration for this anymore. So this will help put you on point. You can go through your reverse outline, remember what you were writing, remember why you were writing it, and use that to propel yourself forward. So start with what you have and then move on into plotting something bigger. And if you turn into a full-blown planner because of this, that's great. We love planners here. I am just not a planner. So, we love planners. So take your outline from this one, copy it over, start over for book 2, and maybe you can do your outline before you even start writing book 2 if you want. And you can always adjust. Just because you write it down in an outline doesn't mean you have to stick with it. So that's suggestion there. If you remove a character and you still have a story, then it's not an important character. Exactly. And I think I don't want to have any confusion with me saying just because you have more than one main POV character and only one is crucial to the primary theme doesn't mean that your other character isn't still a main character. It just means they're a secondary main character because their role is still crucial, but just not to the plot's main theme. If you take Sam and replace him with Pippin, that doesn't mean that that role is not important or that somebody doesn't need to fill that role, right? It just means that that role is now going to look super different because Pippin is a totally different person than Sam and would have reacted completely different ways. So you have to ask yourself, if you replace Pippin with Frodo, would the ring have ever even gotten to Mordor? No, it needed to be Frodo's story. We would have been in big trouble in Middle Earth if Pippin had to bring the ring to Mordor. All right. So after you finish your characters, we're going to move into fleshing out your world. This is the last step that goes into what you're tracking on your outlines, right? Your primary world building. On the primary world building, you should have the world level. What world is this taking place in? Is this our world? Is this a dual reality version? Is this a completely different world? What countries exist within that world? What races or religions or cultures or politics exist within that world? Most of us pantsers didn't take the time to really think all this stuff through because we were excited about the story, and that's great. But now we got to think about it on the back end because some of our plot related questions are going to tie back to the world. Why does the main character care what the culture thinks about insert thing here? His marriage to this person, him going on this trip, him taking this job. That all comes back to the big picture world building. And then you should be clear on what is a myth and what is a fact in that world. If you have any floating points in your story that are just because, we probably need to go deeper, right? So if Star Wars came out today, people would go, why was Finn able to pick up the lightsaber and use it without ever training on it in his life? Why was Rey able to save life by giving life when all these other Jedis have studied for lifetimes in an attempt at doing it without ever being taught anything at all? Are these holes, or are these little details that could have just been explained better with some world building, with a sentence here or a sentence there, right? You want your story to make sense. You don't want to leave readers wondering, how or why that could have happened within the world building guidelines you gave them. You're in control. If you tell them that every female granddaughter of this of evil Sith and Jedi mixed powers can do this thing without training, then that's your world. That's the rule. She's the granddaughter. She can do it. Quit arguing about it. We move on with our day. But you're the writer, so don't forget you're in control. You can write what you like. Just give the readers the rules a little bit, right? I love this. The outline and plot are more like a trail guide or tourist brochure for my muse. While writer me wants structure and direction, my muse is a cactus drunk jackrabbit on a full moon running amok. Oh, we've got to start somewhere. And they're meant to be a guide. These are not firm, fast rules, right? And once you get your broad picture world building, you're going to pull back into your secondary world building. And this is going to be where you introduce magic systems, cultural norms, cultural expectations, clothes that they wear, food that they eat, flora and fauna, and things that sometimes when we are very focused on a plot or a character, we forget. Oh, yeah, they haven't slept in 13 days because I've had them on a journey without camping, literally running nonstop for 13 days. How are they still alive? How have they not starved to death? How are they not dehydrated? Somebody hasn't fainted yet. Nobody has blisters. I need to know what these people are doing so that I can do it better before I go to Disney next time. What is going on in this story? Let your readers know what is going on in the character's life by bringing them in a little deeper. Sometimes scattering in the mundane can make a huge difference in relatability for your characters. So, and then transportation and living. Are they walking everywhere? Are they flying everywhere? And keep it consistent. Why do they have cars here, but they're riding horses and carriages somewhere else? Do they do that for fun? Like every once in a while here, we can hire a horse and carriage and go on a carriage ride? Or have we jumped world building expectations and let that slip? And then finally, as we just alluded to a little bit, we're going to talk about plugging in holes. When you finish a reverse outline, you should have a very rough idea of the plot in your story. And some of those beats, if you use a beat sheet, may be empty. You're going to have characters that may or may not fit into those little buckets that I showed on the screen, and you may not know where to go to strengthen that character so that they firmly fit in the role they want. You may not have a role, and maybe you think you want to add a character in, and that requires a huge revision, right? These holes are more than just things that can be fixed with one or two sentences. Maybe they start in one world and it's medieval, and by the end of the book, they're in a steampunk high-tech world, and now you got to go back and rewrite the whole first part of the book, right? And that comes back to that wall with those strings and the notes. When you try to reverse outline and it was a pants piece and you know there's holes, it can be easy to get lost and get distracted and get pulled into this rabbit hole or that rabbit hole running amok, right? So at AutoCrit, we want to make it easy for you guys to identify your holes so that you're not having to manually track all of these steps yourself. And if you are going to manually try to track all of these steps yourself, we do have free beat sheets you can download to give you a place to start. But if you don't use AutoCrit, there's other tools you can use as well. I do want to pull up one because I know B, you had mentioned something about characters, so I'm going to pull that up here. We're not going to go into a full demo, and I want to leave us time for more questions. Absolutely. But I did want to answer the ones that are relevant that need to see. So let me pull that up. I'll take my slides off. And for those who are wondering, we do have that demo tonight at 8 Eastern. So we would love for you to come back and see Daniel. It's going to be a whole lot of fun. Talking about all the different tools that can help you from the planning process through writing. So it's more than just developmental editing. So here is my writer's desk. I'm going to open up one of my files. This is one that I have finished, but I'm going to show you the editing results that I had on it. So this is my pre-published version. All right. Under the analysis tab, we've got a fiction analyzer and a nonfiction analyzer. This is going to be something that you can use to run on your existing story to get those unresolved plot threads that we talked about, conflict through lines, so unresolved plot threads in the book. These are ones that I've left open mostly for the sake of the fact that this is the first book in a series. I want to come back and finish these in book 2. Themes. You can go chapter by chapter and help yourself when you do your outlining process, going through what happened in every single chapter in the synopsis, but specifically characters. The system will read your book and tell you which characters it thinks falls into which roles and why. Again, I write multiple POV character books most of the time, and it will pick one. Sometimes I don't agree with it, and I go back and change the book because that's not who I wanted as a protagonist. And a good example is I had one book where the main character that it picked up is dead at the end of book 2. So I didn't want anybody getting attached and then being like, why did you kill off this character? And getting mad at me and not reading the next books. So I had to go back and redo the beginning to open with that character's POV, right? So that way the character who's there the whole series is the one you're invested in. And when the other character dies, it's tragic, but it's not the same as your main character dying along the way. So you can see who it says is your main character and why. And you can also go down to character archetypes. And if you have those other characters, it will put them here. So here's the main antagonist and why. Here's the relationship character, which is not to be confused, again, with romantic relationships. A relationship character is someone who gets the main character to their goal. That can be a mentor, that can be a friend, that can be a lover. Sometimes that is a romantic love interest. It can be a sister. Whoever that is would be a relationship. Distraction character, my support character, my opposition character, emotion characters, all of these are fleshed out, and it gives me reasons why all of those people are there. And then it also gives me other characters who I name who aren't included up here necessarily, because I have a large cast in this book. It is an epic fantasy. I got about the same amount of characters as Tolkien would have. There's not roles for all those characters, but it does list out all those characters so that I can track them and make sure that if I kill someone off, I don't bring them off in the next book. Or if I introduce somebody, they don't vanish when I'm pantsing the next book. So how do I decide which characters are important enough to add to the beat sheet was the question. I would use this section. Now, I personally, having AutoCrit, would save the character archetypes to notes by clicking this yellow notepad. That's going to put it up here in this notes section. So if I scroll down, here it is, fiction analyzer characters. Then I can go over to my fiction story builder, and you can also export that out to docx. I can go down to characters, and I can copy and paste from my notes into there. So to make it easier, I'm actually going to just plug that note right here as a bookmark. So I'm going to link this to characters. There's my full list. I'm going to save it. And now when I pull this up and I'm over on my builder right here, under characters, I can pull this up and go, okay, here's the protagonist, that's Narya. Antagonist. And select there, link, antagonist, copy, and paste. And there it is. And in the course of just running it once, saving it to notes, and dropping it in my builder, I've tracked exactly who I have. Now, if I don't know who should be in a role, or I end up with a empty role, there's a little generative button here that will give you an idea. It will not generate content for your book. It will not write for you. It will not rewrite for you. It will not write a new character into your story for you in any way, but it will give you ideas of what kind of relationship character you could use based on all the other fields you have. If I run this right now, it's not going to give me as targeted a suggestion because all my boxes are blank. I've only copied over antagonists, so I would wait to run it until I plugged in everything else. But then I would run this and I might rerun it a few times and get some different ideas and think, do I want the relationship character to be a love interest? Do I want it to be a mentor? Do I want it to be a sibling? Who could it be? And it's like having a friend or another writer just throwing out ideas and coming up with a plan together. And your beat sheets are built in here too, as well, as I mentioned earlier. Plot-centered, character-centered, romance. All the beats with explanations are over here as well. So you can go through those. And the same thing, your analyzer will do a chapter by chapter level synopsis. And I save those to notes. And then I click on the note and you can copy and paste it into this section. And where you're missing something, maybe you don't have a moment where the character refuses the call. Is that a choice that you want to keep stylistically, which is fine? Or is that something you just didn't think about and now you need to go back and work it in to keep that from being a hole? In which case you can keep this blank, type some ideas, generate some ideas to get your ideas flowing, and then delete it out and write what you want there. This is just a way to keep everything in one place without needing the wall of stickies if you don't want them. So you've got your notes here and everything, and then you can copy and paste them into your builders. So I'm going to pause there and bring up any questions you guys have. Feel free to drop them. We've got about 5-10 minutes or so. There's way too many tools. Thank you to those of you who've shown some love for. There are way too many tools to show right now, and reverse outlining is just one small capability of what you can use AutoCrit for. We have an entire series that we do for free on how to plan and draft your book, how to developmentally edit your book, line edit your book, copy edit your book, and now you can even ebook format your book. So come back tonight for a demo to get sort of a sneak peek of all those little details. And there is a special offer in the description box too, if you want to give AutoCrit Pro a try, and then you'll have some questions, I'm sure, and you can bring those tonight for Daniel. Yes, and SD's reminding, please do remember to fill out that feedback form because we want you guys entered for the giveaway for the AuthorTube Writing Conference too. A supposedly unimportant character became important in my project, so that's hard to do. Yeah, characters will grow, especially for pantsers. I think we let characters grow into things they weren't supposed to be, right? I mentioned the dark fantasy. There was not supposed to be any romance, and then entered this morally gray main character or antagonist, and he was a good mirror for her. He was not supposed to end up with her in any way. And in book 2, I think they're going to end up together. Spoilers for people who read my stuff. But they are not supposed to get together. That was not the point of the book. And he grew in importance as his role changed. He came on as an obstacle character for her, and through mutual respect growing over the story has grown into more of a supporting character, and in the end of book 2 has grown into relationship character. So it's okay for your characters to change roles as the story goes on, as long as that's what you wanted them to do. Verse outlining has found several problems in my giant time travel series, and I've detailed plotting in 50,000 word world building document. Yeah. It's okay. And that's really the moral of the story. I hope everybody who's doing this for the first time takes away from this. I call my first draft my garbage draft. And a lot of writers get to the end of their first draft and they think it's no good. Your first draft isn't supposed to be good. It's just supposed to be written. Then you can fix it. You can flesh this out. You can make it better. You can ask for tips. You can expand. You can cut out. The finished product of a book hardly ever looks like it did in that rough garbage draft. So take heart that you're not alone. You're not a terrible writer just because you feel like your first draft is bad. Don't burn it. Come back and we can work together to get it fixed, right? Let's see. This comparison would not work over a series, but one book at a time. So starting for reverse outlining, it would be usually for a single book. Now, I have had completed series because the Analyzer in AutoCrit is a new tool that rolled out last fall, and it is a life-saving tool. But I have been writing in AutoCrit for over 5 years, and so we did not have this tool. So I have gone back and plugged my books into it now that we have it. I have a master file, but know that if you write big books, it's going to be very slow. So what I recommend doing, instead of running your entire 6-book series of 250,000 word epic fantasies through it, is run one through it. Again, save those notes. So I've got mine pulled up here. Save your notes. And when you go to save and do save as, you can do book 2 OAL. And when you save it, it will create a new file and it will keep your content. It will keep your notes and it keeps your builder. So you can come in here and then save this stuff as notes. You got it already. Run book 2 and add it to your notes. Compound it to your notes. Ideally, you'll be doing this as you write series. But if you have series you've written in the past, this is a good way to get caught up. Plug the book in. Save as with your notes, delete the text, paste the text for book 2, and then run book 2 and add book 2 to the notes. And by the time you're done, you're going to end up with a file that has notes for 6 points. And then you can go, that thread really is unresolved. It's been a hole since book 1, and I never did address it, and I'm at the end of book 6. And I've got to go back and fix my series. Yeah. The links for AutoCrit and the AWC are in the description box. Yes, please check those out. And you can absolutely, like Hawkins said, do a summary breakdown and run it as well. It has to be at least 200 words to run through. Oh, thanks so much, Steph. Good to see you on. Well, thank you all so much for joining us today. It has been such a pleasure. To access the demo tonight, you would want to go to the AWC playlist, which is in the description box, and just scroll down to AutoCrit's presentation and hit the bell. And we will be there live at 8 p.m. And Dana will be happy to answer all your questions that we have time for, show you around the site a little bit. I might be hanging out in the chat as well. And definitely show some love to Shannon and the team for putting this together. We wish you guys all the best on your writing. If you have any questions about AutoCrit at all, we're always available before you even sign up at the little help bubble in the bottom right-hand corner. Thanks so much, everybody. Take care. Have a great day.